You and your team members are standing at base camp in the Karakoram mountain range. The mountain is known by many names: Mount Godwin Austen, Ketchu, and others. At over 28,000 feet, it is the second highest mountain in the world next to Mount Everest. You and your team will climb to the peak for glory and fame. The whole time, Mother Nature and the opposing teams are ready to stop you at every turn. The higher up you go, the harder it is to gain footing and to breathe. At times, you'll be forced to take shelter from the weather. You will constantly be scrutinizing over your options and your risks. Getting to the peak is only half of the goal. You then must safely get your hikers back down the mountain without both of them dying. This is K2. In the box you get a double-sided board, an instruction manual, 12 weather tiles depicting either summer or winter weather effects, a weather marker, 20 mountaineer pawns in 5 colors with 2 of 2 different shapes, 10 tent markers in 2 shapes in 5 different colors, 20 risk tokens, a first player marker. You also get a player mat in each color, 10 acclamation tokens in 2 of each color. You get 5 decks of 19 cards, 1 for each player, which consists of 10 movement cards, 5 acclamation cards, 3 robe cards, and 1 rescue card. In K2, players will take their team of hikers and race to the top to get the most victory points within an 18-day excursion. K2 is basically played in 4 phases. The first phase, which I like to call the preparation phase, the action phase, the acclimatization adjustment phase, and finally what I call the cleanup phase. In the preparation phase, players will draw up to 6 cards from their deck simultaneously. On the 6th, 12th, and 18th day, they will only use the remaining 3 cards from their deck. Next, players will play 3 cards simultaneously. Once players have simultaneously played 3 cards, they will then add up their movement points, and whoever has the highest amount will have to take a risk token. Movement points are depicted by this green circle with the boot print in it. Rope cards have a upward and downward movement value. In the case of taking a risk token, only the upward movement value is calculated. The cards with the blue circle and lungs on them depict acclimatization points. These are not counted towards taking a risk token. So in this example, the green player has 5 movement points, 3 of the regular movement points, and then 2 on his rope card in upward movement. The yellow player has 4 movement points. So the green player would then have to take a risk token of his choice. In this case, he took a risk token with a value of 1. During the action phase, players will have to use the penalty they receive from the risk tokens. They could subtract the value of the risk token from an acclimatization card. So in this case, if the green player played the acclimatization card with 3 points, he would subtract 1, leaving him with 2 points of acclimatization. He could subtract the value of the risk token from a movement card, but only if that movement card was applied to one of his 2 hikers. So in this case, if the green player played this movement card on his first hiker, he would simply remove the movement card and the risk token from the game. He could subtract the risk token from the value of a rope card. This is like a movement card, but instead of just subtracting the value from your movement, you have to announce if you're going to use the up movement or the down movement first. And then you would subtract the value of the risk token from whichever direction you choose. So if the green player played the rope card on one of his hikers, he could subtract 1 point of downward movement from the rope card to give him a total of 2 downward movements to use on his action phase. The final way a player could pay the risk penalty of a risk token is on their acclimatization track. In order to do this, they must assign the risk token to a hiker that will take an action during this phase. So in this example, the green player will reduce his acclimatization track from 3 to 2, discarding the risk token. Once players have paid their penalty for the risk tokens, they can move on to their action phase. This will be done in turn order, which is depicted by the first player who has his pickaxe. During the action phase, players can add acclimatization cards to their acclimatization track, but they must assign the card to one hiker. So the yellow player will assign these 3 points of acclimatization to her first hiker. She will then move the marker up 3 spots on the track. 1, 2, 3. And then discard the acclimatization card. She can then choose to play her movement cards on one or both of her hikers. The regular movement cards will allow you to move whatever value the card is in any direction, either up or down the mountain. To move from one spot legally to another spot, it must be connected with a rope and carabiner. So to go from this spot to this spot is a legal move, but to go from here to here is not legal. It is not connected by a rope and carabiner. You must also pay attention to direction when you are moving. As you can see, the carabiner is closer to this spot than this spot. That means that going from here to here would be going up the mountain. Okay, then doing the reverse would be going down the mountain. Going from here to here would be going down the mountain. On some parts of the boards, the carabiners are tough to decide on whether they are closer to one spot or the other. A rule of thumb that I use is the wider part of the carabiner is always going up the mountain. The narrow part that comes closer together like a V is going down the mountain. So in this case here, this is going up the mountain, and this would be going down the mountain. An action card must be played on one hiker, and the value of the card cannot be split between your two hikers. But you can play more than one card on one hiker. For example, the yellow player will play all 4 points of movement on one hiker. She will then move that hiker 4 points worth down the mountain. So 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can see, spots on the board have a yellow circle with a number on them and boot prints. This represents how many points of movement it will take to move into that spot. The yellow player could also choose to play one card on one hiker and one card on the other hiker. So the yellow player will move one of her hikers down the mountain 3 points worth of movement. So she moved from here to here. As you can see, there's a yellow circle with a 3 in it. That means she can only move one spot worth 3 movement points. She can then play the other card on her other hiker. So she will move her other hiker down 1 movement point worth of the mountain. So she moves from here to here. As you can see, there is no yellow circle. Anytime that happens, it will cost 1 movement point to move into that space. A player can also play a rope card on their hiker. But before they do, they must choose whether they're going to use the up movement or the down movement. They cannot use a combination of the two, one or the other. So say the yellow player decides to play 3 points of movement on her one hiker. She would then move that hiker 3 movement points of value down the mountain. So 1, 2, 3. Players can also combine a rope card with a regular movement card. For example, say the yellow player decides she wanted to move 2 spaces up with the rope card and then use a regular card. She would then move one of her hikers 3 points of movement up the mountain. Now, what is designated as the upward value on a rope card can be used to move in any direction, like a normal movement card. Players can also change direction of their movement, but only if they play one direction with a rope card and the other direction with a normal movement card. For example, say the yellow player wanted to move down the mountain 3 points of movement actions. She would assign the rope card in that direction to one of her hikers and move the hiker 3 points of movement action down the mountain. 2, 3. She can then choose to play this normal card worth 2 points of action and move up the mountain. 1, 2. One final action you can do during your action phase is pitching a tent. The tent must correspond with the hiker shape that you are going to pitch the tent with. A tent costs however many movement points the spot that the tent is going to be pitched in cost. For instance, the yellow player wants to move into this spot and pitch a tent here. It would cost her 1 movement point to move into the spot and then 1 additional point to pitch the tent in that spot. With rope cards, a tent can only be pitched with the upward movement actions. As you can see, the board is split up between 4 different levels. Each section represents an altitude level. So going from down here to the first white line here would be below 6,000 meters, which you can see here on the left side of the board. The next level is between 6 and 7,000 meters. Then the next level is 7 to 8,000 meters, and finally 8,000 meters to the peak of K2, which is 8,211 meters. As you can see, in this altitude range, in a 2-player game, you can only have 2 hikers on one spot at the end of their turn. The further up the mountain you get, the more narrow the trails are. As you can see in this altitude level, the legend says that you can only have one hiker in any spot in a 2-player game. But down here with a 5-player game, you have an option of having 2 hikers or 3 hikers, depicted by this little red hiker symbol. If the green player were to end his turn in the same spot as the yellow player in this altitude, it would be illegal. But if the green player had enough movement points, he could go through the spot with the yellow hiker and continue on to the next spot on the board. As you can see, there are flags with numbers on them as you get on some spots going up the mountains. This represents how many victory points you will receive for the hiker that is in that level of altitude. You would move your victory point marker up with your hikers as they go up the mountain. But if a hiker ever went back down the mountain, the victory point marker would stay at the highest level that the hiker was at. For example, if the yellow player moved from this spot to here, his victory point marker would stay where it is. He would receive 5 points for that hiker if that is where the victory point marker was at the end of the game. When players reach the peak of K2, they must put their victory point marker in the order that they reached the peak first. So in this case, the green player reached the peak first, and then the yellow player reached the peak. This is due to if there is a tie. At the end of the game, if there is a tie, whoever reached the peak first wins the game. The next phase of the game is the acclimatization adjustment phase. If one of your hikers ends their turn on a spot with a blue circle with a lung in it, they will gain that many points in acclimatization. If a player's hiker ends their turn on a spot with a red circle with a lung in it, they will lose that many points of acclimatization. You would then add or subtract that many acclimatization points from your acclimatization track. Throughout the game, you'll also have to worry about weather. As you can see here, there is a white line going from 6,000 to 7,000 meters. What that means is if you are in that altitude at the end of this day, you will lose 1 point of acclimatization due to the weather effect. Some weather tiles have movement restrictions in them. So in this case, if you were between 6,000 and 7,000 meters on this day, you would have to add 1 point of movement to every space you want to move into. Meaning, during the movement phase, if the yellow player wishes to go from this spot to this spot, instead of paying 2 movement points, due to the weather, she would now have to pay 3 movement points. Some tiles have a circle that is half movement point reduction and half acclimatization point reduction. In this particular case, if the hiker was between 6,000 meters and 8,000 meters, that hiker would have to add 1 point of movement to every movement he made during the action phase, and during the acclimatization adjustment phase, he would lose 1 point of acclimatization. The final part of the acclimatization phase is to see if your hiker is on a spot with a tent. In the case of the yellow hiker, he is in this spot with a tent. What that means is he would gain 1 acclimatization point for the tent. But being that he is on a spot with a negative acclimatization point effect, he would not gain any acclimatization points. If your hiker's acclimatization ever dropped below 1 on your acclimatization track, your hiker would be considered dead. If that were to happen, your hiker's victory point marker would go to 1, and the hiker itself would be removed from the board. Now you can choose to play the family variant, which applies this rescue card to your hikers. If your hiker were to die and you use this rescue card, you would move the hiker down below 6,000 meters, and then you would move his victory point marker 4 points down the track. If both of your hikers were killed during your climb, you would lose the game. The final part of the game is what I call the cleanup phase. During this phase, you will pass the first player marker to the person on the left. You will move the weather token over to the next day. If the weather token is on the 3rd day of a tile, you would then move it onto the tile to the right and slide that tile over to the left. And this represents your current forecast and your extended forecast. During this part of the game, I also reveal another risk token. So you always have 3 risk tokens revealed at the beginning of the preparation phase. The players would then draw up to 6 cards and start the preparation phase over again. During the 6th, 12th, and 18th day, if you have 3 cards left, you must play them before discarding them into your discard pile and then reshuffle on your deck. When the weather token gets to the last day of the last tile, meaning you cannot draw any more tiles, the game is over and you will calculate how many victory points you have between your 2 hikers. Whoever has the most wins the game. Okay, so I got K2 for my Secret Santa. That's what we're going to be playing today, okay? I'm a wuss, so we're going to be playing on the easier side, which is depicted by the, the light blue background there with a few clouds, not the real dark gray background. That's one of the decisions you got to make. Another decision you got to make before you start is which weather to use. Okay, you can use the sunny summer weather, which is a little easier, or the winter weather, which is a little tougher. Again, I'm a wuss. We're going with the summer weather. Okay, so just discard the winter weather tiles into the box. You're done with them for now. Okay, you gotta choose what colors each player is going to be. I'm going to be green. Jen's going to be yellow as usual. Okay, so you're going to hand each player their deck of cards. Okay, this will be their draw deck. And it's depicted with a circle with a symbol. In green's case, it's a green triangle. Alright, it has a symbol and a color in that little circle below the peak symbol there. Okay, this is the last decision you'll have to make, and that is whether or not to play with the family variant, the rescue card. We're not going to be doing that. I'm not too much of a wuss, just a little bit of a wuss. Alright, so we're not going to be playing with that. Okay, so you hand each player their deck of cards, and they shuffle them up. You hand them their player board. You give them their 2 acclimatization tokens. Also their 2 tents in the shapes of their hikers. Okay, and then you hand them their hikers. Now, if you notice, there's 2 different shaped hikers, and there's 2 of each. Okay, so one set, 1 of each different shape of hikers, we're going to place on the victory track marker. Okay, each player do that. Jen will do that too. Okay, and then the other set of hikers you're going to place down here in the base camp area. Okay, so there's me, there's Jen. Okay, so you give each player their player board. Okay, put Jen up top there. I'll go a little bit below her there. Actually, you know what? I'm going to set it up like this. Jen will be on the left, I'll be on the right. Alright. Give them each their tent tokens. Okay, 1 for each different shaped hiker. I'd like to put it next to the picture of the hikers. It's just me. You could do whatever you choose to. We then put the acclimatization markers on 1. Okay, because we're at the base camp, and that gives us 1 acclimatization point. Each player takes their draw deck. You shuffle the weather tiles. Okay. As you can see, this bluish border here is up. I don't know what other people do. I just flip them over like this. Okay, and then just draw the first one over there. Okay, put them next to it. So here we got the current weather, and this is the forecasted weather. Okay, put your weather token on the first day. Okay, you take your risk tokens, place them all face down, give them a little shuffle. And then you take 3 and place them face up. Okay? Now the final decision you have to make is who will be the first player. That'll be Jen. And you are now ready to play K2.